Alright, welcome back to another Bible video. We have made it through the entirety of the Old Testament. I'm sorry, that's not correct. Through the entirety of the New Testament, from Matthew chapter 1 to Revelation chapter 22, with a few exclusions. Thank you, YouTube. There are some videos that I need to reshoot, which I will reshoot when we complete the entirety of the Bible, because they were pulled down during the age of COVID-19 for violating YouTube's whatever facts. Interpret that however you see fit. So all the New Testament is done. And in the Old Testament, we've made it from Genesis chapter 1 through Malachi chapter 4. And for context, that represents about this much of the Bible right here. And so we have left here in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament. Come on, brain. Brain, do brain stuff. What we have left in the Old Testament to read together is about this much right here. About this much of this book left to read. So we got about 80% of the way through. And it's only taken us, 5 or 6 years? Why? Why that long? Because clearly, I have what they like to call the attention deficit disorder. And we don't just read it for the sake of reading it. We read it so that we can analyze and apply it to our lives. Right? Fork and knife. Let's chew this stuff up and consume it. So we have left to read the Psalms, all 150 of them, asterisk. And we're going to start in Psalms 1 and maybe 2 today. So we have the Psalms, we have Proverbs, we have Job, which I must tell you, Job is not one of my favorite books, but we'll read Job. We have Song of Songs, which is probably not for little ears. We have the Book of Ruth, we have Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, we have the Book of Esther, also not one of my favorites, but we'll read it. We have Nehemiah, or Nehemiah, depending on how white you are. Then we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles. That's what's left. So, today we begin the Psalms. Now, I must tell you, the Psalms is not one of my favorite books of the Bible. And I've been a little, what would you say, hesitant. Maybe there's been a lack of eagerness would be the best way for me to confess. There's been a lack of eagerness for me to get on camera and read the Psalms because the Psalms don't really do it for me. However, here we are, being obedient, reading the Psalms together. And in typical Pastor Bear fashion, I was like, well, if we're going to read this book together, we need to know what we're reading. Who, what, when, where, why, right? So I started doing some research this morning and actually learned some things about the psalms that I did not know before. And I'm going to teach them to you. So Psalms, just sort of for context here, right? These are, essentially, this is the Hebrew hymnal. Okay, these are songs, these are praises. Every one of these was originally written to be a song. They're also contextual songs. We'll get into that in a minute. Think about that. If you think about your playlist, you probably have songs you listen to when you're on a road trip, and songs that you listen to at church for worship, which are different than songs you listen to at a party, which are different than songs that are played at a funeral, which are different than songs that you might play when you're rejoicing after a child is born, or you get that big promotion at work, or whatever it is, right? You have chill songs, and you have wild songs, and as a musician myself, I understand that. There are 5 sections, asterisk, we'll get into that in a minute, of the Psalms. and they're broken into 5 books, books 1 through 5. And so book 1, and by the way, if you have a pencil and paper, a notebook and a pen, here's where we begin to write if you haven't been writing already. So book 1 is Psalms 1 through 41. Book 2 is Psalms 42 through 72. Book 3 is Psalms 73 through 89. Book 4 is Psalms 90 through 106. And Book 5 is Psalms 107 through 150. Each book ends with a blessing. So our Psalms 41, 72, 89, 106, and 150. Repeating again, Psalms 41, 72, 89, 106, and 150 are all blessings or benedictions, or they are doxological, if you like gigantic Greek words in Orthodox Christianity. Now, the idea of 5 sections or 5 books of the Psalms was introduced by later editors, which we'll get to in a moment, to mimic the 5 books of the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Again, rightly dividing what Torah means, not Jewish stuff, it's biblical stuff. The Jewish Torah vastly exceeds the first 5 books, the Pentateuch in the Bible, which we have had, at this point, probably dozens of hours of commentary on, having read the entirety of the New Testament and most of the Old Testament together. Now, that's the 5 sections. What about the writers of the Psalms? Who wrote the Psalms? Well, it depends on who you ask. There's a lot of tradition here in who wrote the Psalms. And from an historiological, archaeological standpoint, the question of who wrote the Psalms is pretty complicated, other than on some Psalms, the writer is notated in the Psalm. For example, a Song of David. Okay, cool. That's a big help. But not all Psalms are attributed, meaning we don't know who wrote many of the Psalms. And what the historical record does show us is that David did not write all the Psalms. However, King David, if you're writing down writers, King David, David Avimelech, is that what the Jews call him? King David did write the Psalms, some of them, as did King Solomon, as did Asaph, as did the sons of Korah. What? Hold on, exclamation point. Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. As did Moses. Moshe, might have heard of him. Now, it's important to point out here, we've got 2 tribes that we know are writing Psalms. So we have the kings, David and Solomon, of the tribe of Judah. And then Asaph, sons of Korah, and Moshe are Levi. So that's interesting. Now, Asaph was the son of Berechiah. If you remember our videos on the book of Zechariah, Berechiah may be a familiar name. Yeah. Because Zechariah was a grandson of Berechiah. Berechiah was the last high priest during the First Temple period. Super interesting. Asaph was a Levite and the grandson of the prophet Samuel. Who's the prophet Samuel? Go back and read the story of King David and his anointing and Goliath and all of that. Asaph was one of the particular individuals that was set aside by King David specifically for worship. One of the Levites for worship. So Asaph wrote Psalms 50, Psalms 73 through 83. Then we come to the sons of Korah. The sons of Korah. Wait a minute. I thought If we go over here in Numbers chapter 16, there was this epic rap battle between Moses and Korah. Numbers chapter 16. Remember, Korah was like, "You're not the guy, we're the guy." And Moses was like, "We'll find out, meet me for a rap battle in front of the tabernacle." And Korah's like, "Bet, yo." And then they showed up, and Korah's bars were not fire, but there was fire, because fire fell from the heavens and consumed him. And specifically, Numbers 16, well, let's start at 28. And Moshe said, "By this you know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, including these straight bars of fire, that they are not from my own heart. If these die as all men do, or if they are visited as all men are visited, then Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh creates what is unheard of on the earth, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, they shall go down alive into Sheol, the place of the dead. Then you shall know that these men have scorned Yahweh." And it came to be, as he, Moshe, ended speaking all these words, that the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and all the men with Korah, with all their goods. Okay, hold on. So they and all those with them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all of Israel who were round about them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." And a fire came out from Yahweh and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. And then thus concludes the epic rap battle. So what's up with these sons of Korah? Well, let's go forward about 10 chapters. Numbers 26. Numbers 26, verse 11 to 11. Okay, well, actually, let's look at verse 9, 26:9. And the sons of Eliav, Nemuel, and Dathan, and Aviram. This is the Dathan and Aviram, were the called ones of the congregation who contended against Moshe and against Aaron in the company of Korah when they contended against him. So the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, and Aviram. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah when that company died, when the fire consumed 250 men, and they became a sign. But the sons of Korah did not die. Okay. Well, of Eliav, so these are, genealogies, challenging here. All right. So Nemuel was not there with Dathan and Abiram when they were consumed. The sons of Korah did not die. So maybe not all of them were swallowed up, even though it says all of them were swallowed up. Or maybe we have a third bloodline here, kind of like Cain and Abel and then Seth. Or Shet. Remember that? Okay. So, and ADD brain, Shet, Set. Who? Wait, now we get into Egyptology. Who is Set? How interesting. What are you saying, Pastor Bear? I'm saying that the pagans love to take scripture and twist it to their particular needs, and we're not allowed to do that. But there's a third bloodline here. It's not just Dathan and Abiram. It's also Nemuel. So if we go to verse 11, but the sons of Korah did not die. So did this bloodline continue? Well, clearly it did, because over here in the Psalms, we find the sons of Korah. Okay. Now, we also, if you read the Chronicle or First Chronicles genealogies, you'll find the prophet Samuel. Right? There's that guy again, right? Of whom Zechariah and Berechiah and Asaph are all related. By the way, it appears per the genealogies that Samuel, that man got around. Let's just say that, he did not always keep it sheathed. How's that for an analogy? There are several important people in the Bible that trace their genealogies back to Samuel. Samuel traces his genealogies back to the lines of Korah. So clearly not everyone from Korah died. So Dathan and Abiram did, but Nemuel, not so much. So again, Cain and Abel, and then Set. Dathan and Abiram, and then Nemuel, so that the bloodline might continue. So the sons of Korah did not die. In other words, their genealogy continued. Now, the genealogies are not something we're going to burn a whole bunch of time on. You can look into that yourself, because otherwise we're 15 minutes in. We haven't read a word of the Psalms yet, because that's how my brain works. All right. So the sons of Korah wrote Psalms 42, 44 through 49, Psalms 84, 85, 87, and 88. Then, other authors of the Psalms include Etan or Ethan and Heman or He-Man, not Masters of the Universe, She-Ra and riding around on big cat stuff. Not that He-Man, but Haman or Heman, Heman. The Ezrahites descended from Ezra. Remember Ezra? Good dude, that guy. Yeah. So, also Levites. Also, the grandsons of Samuel, a Levite descended from Korah. Now, Etan or Ethan wrote Psalm 89. But Heman or Haman wrote Psalm 88. Well, wait a minute. You just told us that the sons of Korah also wrote Psalm 88. That would mean that Etan and Haman, are sons of Korah. Because when we say sons of, it does not mean, see here today in our modern nomenclature, son and father are one generation apart. But in the Hebrew mindset, Eastern mindset, we are all sons of Adam. We are all sons of Abraham. We're all sons of Messiah, and also the bride of, but yeah, it gets complicated. Son means descended from, not who's your daddy, in the Hebraic mindset. Okay, so Etan and Haman, the Ezrahites, are grandsons of Samuel. So Ezrahites means descended from a sub-tribe of Ezra, who is somehow tied into Samuel, who are sons of Korah through the Nemuel bloodline, most likely, because Dathan and Abiram were consumed. So Etan and Haman, Etan, Psalm 89, Haman, Psalm 88. You see, why am I bringing this up? I'm working myself up to get excited about reading the Psalms, because they don't do a whole lot for me, as previously mentioned. Now, timelines here. Oh, when we're talking about writers of the Psalms, there are some very Jewish oral traditions. Very Jewish oral traditions. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. But, for, honorable mention, the Jewish oral traditions say that some Psalms were composed by Adam himself, the first man, and then passed down. Because it gets into this whole, what the Jews call the written law versus the oral law. And the oral law was then codified into what has become the Jewish Torah, which includes not just the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, but in clear violation of Deuteronomy 4 verse 2, do not add to or take away from the word of this law. The Jewish, air quote, oral traditions, which are no longer oral but written down, include the Kabbalah, the Mishnah, the Zohar, the Talmud, the blah, 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 blah. Woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites. But anyway, the oral traditions, which are now written down. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. say that some of the Psalms were composed by Adam himself, the first man, Adam. Melchizedek, which is interesting. Let me just take a quick detour here, because the Jewish traditions do not recognize Christ, and therefore do not recognize what we call Christophanies, God in the flesh. Note that this is one of the charges that the Pharisees bring against Messiah himself, the idea that he could be God in the flesh. Okay, so they don't recognize this, meaning that to them Melchizedek was a man, not a Christophany, not Yah made flesh. Now, I go with the latter because I firmly believe in Christ. Oh, by the way, for everybody who's going to ask yet again, because we get lots of new people here all the time, that is the man, the myth, the legend, Charles Spurgeon, over my head. Charles Spurgeon, www.google.com. So, Melchizedek in the Jewish traditions was a man, most likely Shem, one of the descendants of Noah. Now, Paul tells us in the book of Hebrews that Melchizedek was not a man. Now, remember, Paul was a Pharisee. So the people groups are not homogenous in their beliefs. Okay? It's like saying that all Republicans believe this, all Democrats believe that, all Americans act this way. It's hard to do. So to say that the Pharisees believed, well, the Pharisees were a group of people like any other group of people. And Paul was one. And Paul says in Hebrews that Melchizedek was a man without a genealogy. Oh, no beginning and no end. Aleph and Tav, the Yah made flesh of Christophany, a foreshadowing of Messiah who is to come. Because Malik or Melche means king, and Zadik means righteous. The king of righteousness, who dwelt at Salem, Salam, which means peace. He was the king of peace. Jesus is the prince of peace. Yes, prince in that descended from king. Super interesting. So anyway, the Jews say, which again, there are no homogenous beliefs amongst people groups, but air quote, the Jews, air quote, say that Melchizedek wrote the Psalms. Now I find this interesting because if Melchizedek did write the Psalms, at least some of the Psalms, that means that Yah himself wrote the Psalms, which interestingly is the belief of the Muslims. Rabbit hole. So, some of the Psalms were composed by Adam, some of them were composed by Melchizedek, some by Abraham, and some by Jeduthun, who was a Levite of Merari, subclan of Merari, who was actually a trumpet guy. He was like a guy, one of the guys in charge of the shofars. And Jeduthun wrote Psalm 32, 69, and 77. Now, this is super interesting because we have in our book here, depending on which book you're reading, somewhere around 150 Psalms. Standard is 150 Psalms. However, the Septuagint in circulation in Eastern Orthodox churches has Psalm 151. The Syriac version in circulation in Middle Eastern churches has Psalms 152 through 155. Then there's an additional 18 Psalms. Excuse me. An additional 18 Psalms called the Psalms of Solomon, which are non-canonical. They're apocryphal. There's only 4 known copies. However, oh, how the plot thickens, there are a handful of early texts, both Masoretic and Septuagint texts, that are missing pages in the Psalms, the books of the Psalms. And it has been calculated that those missing pages would have fit the 18 missing Psalms of the Psalms of Solomon. Now, why are those pages missing? Well, during the early Second Temple period, so this is going to be Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, those dudes, because in the mouths of two or three let a thing be established. There was a group called the Men of the Great Assembly that was about 120 scribes, sages, and prophets. And they worked on revisions of and codification of the books of the Bible to produce what many know today as the Bible Actual. Now, this is before we get to Emperor Constantine and Council of Nicaea and all of that. And this it's literally called the Men of the Great Assembly. You can do your research on that if you want. The Men of the Great Assembly that included Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, later on Zerubbabel, etc. They did this work, performed this function from the early Second Temple period all the way through the early Hellenistic period. So that would be from the time of approximately Ezra to the time of post-Messiah Gospels, Book of Acts into the early church. And as a result, they redacted many. They added books to the Bible. For example, Nehemiah or Nehemiah, if you're Jewish. They added the book of Nehemiah. They added the laws that are codified in the book of Nehemiah, updates to adherence to the Torah, if you will. And they subtracted a bunch of stuff, including Psalms 151 through 155 and the Psalms of Solomon, and several other things that ended up in a book like this. This is my preferred book, The Lost Books of the Bible, Great Rejected Texts by Joseph B. Lumpkin, because Lumpkin is a biblical scholar, and there is a foreword in each of the Great Rejected Texts in here explaining the veracity and historicity of each one of the texts. For example, what's considered First Enoch is 100% good to go. There's many, many, many texts of it. It's referenced by the Bible. We know that Enoch existed, good to go. However, Second Enoch, Dark Ages creation in the name of Enoch, and Third Enoch, probably Yehudi propaganda. And he lays all of that out as a foreword to each one of the books. So I like this book a lot. Okay, but a lot of the books that are in here ended up in here not because of Constantine, but because of the Men of the Great Assembly. So that's something to dwell on there as well. We discussed that the Psalms were written by a combination of Judah and Levi, the kings and the priests. And the Psalms go from the pre-exilic, so now known historical, pre-exilic, meaning pre-exile from Egypt, to post-exilic. And so we're running the timeline here from somewhere around, we don't know. Depends on which scholars you ask. But from somewhere before Moses leaves Egypt to somewhere after or during the reign of Solomon. So a significant chunk of time here, 1,000 years or so. And then if you go with the oral traditions, it goes all the way back to creation with Adam. There are several different functions of the Psalms. One is communal lamenting, for giving thanks, for prayer, and for repentance. One function is what's considered the royal Psalms, which is for battle, for coronation, and for marriage, which then brings me also back to the lost books of the Bible here. There's a book in here called the Book of War, and it's phenomenal. It reads almost like the Book of Numbers in that it is specific logistical instruction written by Levites for Levites. And it includes in there the blessings that are to be pronounced over the army before they go to war and when they return from war, including one of his particularly poignant, the blessing when they return, they are to stand on the edge of the battlefield, overlooking the slain, and give praise to Yahuwah. Think about what that would look like and feel like. So the blessings over the army, as well as shofars. What sounds to make with your shofar when? What pitches? What blasts? What meter and cadence to use with your shofar for the directing of the armies in battle? It's super interesting. We tend not to think that the priests were at the temple doing temple stuff. Yeah, but when they went to war, if we think about without communication, there's no logistics. Without logistics, we don't win wars. The use of shofars in war. And then also the standard, the battle flag, to delineate from fire team size up to battalion size, the length of the banner, the color of the banner, the inscription upon the banner that was used to direct troops and identify IFF on the battlefield, identification friend or foe. So the book of war is not about wars that took place. It's about how to war from a Levitical standpoint. It's very cool. Very, very cool. I geek out on it. Okay, back to the function of the Psalms. We have communal lamenting, royal psalms. And we have individual laments, aka pleas for help and confession. We have psalms for thanksgiving, praise, worship, wisdom, pilgrimage. 3 times per year, all your men shall present themselves in the place where I make my name dwell. Yeah, spring feasts, Shavuot, and fall feasts. And then also prophetic psalms under the title of thanksgiving. And then there's some psalms that do not conform to any of these categories. And there's many psalms, 50, 60, 70, depending on who you ask and who you read, that have no identified author. So now we've gone 32 minutes on precursor to the Psalms. I find all that stuff very interesting. And now we shall read. Psalms 1. Blessed is the man who shall not walk in the counsel of the wrong, and shall not stand in the path of sinners, and shall not sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the Torah of Yahuwah, not the Torah of anyone else. Torah meaning instruction, translated as law by King Jimmy. The instruction of Yahuwah. His delight is in the instruction, the Torah of Yahuwah, and he meditates in his Torah day and night. That's interesting because you'll see a lot of the new age hippy-dippy people will go like, you got to get your meditation in today. Well, to meditate is to what? To shut out all external input and to focus. Well, to focus on what? His Torah, day and night. For he shall be as a tree planted by the rivers of water that yields its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. This tree planted by water, we see that imagery in Revelation 21:22. Interesting. It also goes to the tree of life, which is a euphemism for Israel, which Ephesians chapter 2, you are now a part of by your belief in Messiah. In Romans chapter 11, you're grafted into this tree that's planted by rivers of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose leaf does not wither, and whatever he does prospers. Whatever you ask in my name shall be given unto you for the glory of the Most High. The wrong are not so, but are like chaff which the wind blows away. This counter-rapture theology here. Chaff, the wheat and the chaff. If you think about a threshing floor, when you thresh wheat, you take a pitchfork and you throw the stems of the wheat, the dried grass, up into the air. On a windy day, wind representing the spirit, ruach, the breath of life. And the wind, the seed falls back to the ground. The seed, and his seed will have enmity with the snake. The seed of the woman will have enmity with the snake. Super interesting. Back to Genesis in the garden. The wheat, the good fruit, falls back to the threshing floor. But the chaff, the wrong, are not so, but the chaff which the wind blows away. The wind blows the wind away. So when we think about being gathered up, we can read elsewhere in Proverbs and in the Gospels, the wrong are plucked from the earth. The wrong are plucked from the earth. You don't want to be blown away like chaff. Therefore the wrong shall not rise in the judgment. This is the second death. Book of Revelation. The wrong shall not rise in judgment. Okay. Nor the sinners in the congregation of the righteous. Well, what's righteousness? Luke 1 verse 6, New Testament definition, blamelessly walking in the commands of Elohim. For Yahweh knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wrong comes to naught. He knows the way of the righteous. Think about that. When you're trying to battle plan what your life looks like, what step do I make next? Yahweh knows. God knows. The Father knows. Talk to him. But the way of the wrong comes to naught. Without the counsel of the Most High, plans fail. There's Proverbs for that as well. So he directs the steps. He knows the way of the righteous. And you could also interpret that a different way. He knows your way. He knows you. There's an intimate knowledge of the way that you conduct yourself when you conduct yourself in righteousness. But the way of the wrong, which is the opposite of righteousness, which is the opposite of delighting in the Torah, which is the opposite of meditating on the Torah, comes to naught, comes to nothing, produces no good fruit. Behold, I come swiftly to reward each man according to his works. You shall know them by their fruits. Right, Messiah. Psalm chapter 2. Why do the nations rage and the people meditate emptiness? Well, look at the compare-contrast here. 1 verse 2. But his delight is in the Torah of Yahweh, and he meditates in his Torah day and night. Verses, the nations rage and the people meditate emptiness. Poor leadership. At what level? Societal, governmental, religious, poor leadership. The people meditate emptiness. We don't want to meditate emptiness. We want to meditate on his instruction. The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his Messiah, and say, let us tear apart their bonds and throw away their ropes from us. So they don't want to be bound by Yahweh and Messiah. Which is why the nations are raging and the people meditate emptiness, and the kings of the earth have stood up and taken counsel with the rulers to stand against the Most High and the Most High made flesh. And so this not only evokes Revelation 19 imagery here, he who sat upon the white horse is called trustworthy and true, but most people fail to recognize that conflict exists both above and, more importantly, below the threshold of open warfare. And so for how long? My entire life, and I'm sure for your entire life too, because many of y'all are older than I am, more learned than I am, have seen more than I have. Our whole lives, the kings of the earth have taken their stand, not Yahweh's stand, have meditated upon emptiness, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his Messiah. Yahweh's Messiah, not the world's Messiah, not who the world has decided to anoint and appoint, but who the Father has decided to anoint and appoint. And you could totally fall in a rabbit hole about Khazarians and relocated Polish bloodlines, the rulers and the kings of the earth taking counsel against Yahweh and against Messiah. Let us tear apart their bonds and throw away their ropes from us. He who is sitting in the heavens laughs. Yahweh mocks them. Then he speaks to them in his wrath and troubles them in his rage, saying, but I have set my king on Zion, my king, my sovereign, on Zion, my set-apart mountain. Oh, it's super cute that you guys want to have little land wars over there in the Middle East and decide who controls this piece of dirt. My king reigns there. It's my mountain. I inscribe for Allah. Yahweh has said to me, you are my son. Today I've brought you forth. And so you can plan against Mashiach all you want. You can choose to not recognize him all you want. Yahweh has said, I set my king on Zion, my set-apart mountain. I inscribe for Allah. Yahweh has said to me, you are my son. Today I have brought you forth. Ask of me, and I make the nations your inheritance. Therefore go forth and make believers out of all nations. Every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. Ask of me, and I make the nations your inheritance, and the ends of the earth your possession. Break them with a rod of iron. Dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Revelation 19, bro. He shepherds them with a rod of iron. And now, be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you rulers of the earth. Serve Yahweh with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the chosen. Now it says chosen in Hebrew, but son in Aramaic. Kiss the chosen, lest he be enraged, and you perish in the way. Lest he be enraged. I want you to think about Messiah. Enraged. Well, that's not a fruit of the Spirit. Jesus is love. Yeah, but have you read the whole book? All of it? Or did you just cherry pick some verses? Or worse yet, were you force fed some cherry picked verses by some air quote pastor on Sunday morning to conform to a theology that's not biblical? Messiah's enraged. The number of people that are killed by Messiah in Revelation 19 is astronomical. I love it when Jesus doesn't act very Christ-like, as the church likes to call it. I love it when he's flipping tables and whipping people and insulting the Pharisees, calling them hypocrites, slaying bad guys. Break them with a rod of iron. Dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. And now be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you rulers of the earth. Serve Yahweh with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the chosen, lest he be enraged and you perish in the way. For soon his wrath is to be kindled. What? Messiah's wrath? Yeah. Yeah. The sifting is ongoing. And I would submit accelerating. There will be no fence to sit on. You will be marked in the forehead by Yah, or you will be marked in the hand of the forehead by the enemy. And there will be no in between. You will have to pick. And if you choose wrongly, but the way of the wrong comes to naught. For Yahweh knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wrong comes to naught. Kiss the chosen, lest he be enraged and you perish in the way. For soon his wrath is to be kindled. Blessed are all those taking refuge in him, in Mashiach, in Yah made flesh. Remember, Yahweh is a warrior. Yahweh is his name. Exodus 15, verse 3. Malachi 3, verse 6. I'm the Lord Yahweh Sabaoth. I change not. And you, O sons of Jacob, Jacob, Israel, shall not come to an end. Sons of Israel shall not come to an end. The Lord Yahweh Sabaoth. Sabaoth has a Hebrew connotation of a general prepared for war. Remember, I don't change. I meant what I said the first time, not the last time. And Yahweh is a warrior. And if Jesus is God, which he is, then he's also a warrior. He is the general, and he does not change. And so we can jump through whatever theological hoops we want to jump through in order to support pet doctrines and dogmas of men. But that enrages the Father. Kiss the chosen. Return to your first love, lest he be enraged and you perish in the way, for soon his wrath is to be kindled. Blessed are all those taking refuge in him. We should rightly divide here the difference between him and his word, which will not return to him void, and churchianity and Judaism and Islam and Mormonism, before we even start to get into the pseudo-pagan and pagan religions. It's not about performative tasks on behalf of a certain belief system or denomination. It's taking refuge in him. It's a personal relationship. Messiah himself said, "Call no man father but your Father in heaven." Oh, I guess unless he's wearing the hat of Dagon and his office is in Rome, then we're allowed to call him Holy Father. No, you're not. And this is not a knock on our Catholic brethren, nor is it a knock on our Pentecostal brethren, or the non-denominationals, or the Assembly of God, or the Baptists, or the King James only people, or the Jews, the Reformed Judaism, and the Orthodox, and the Hasidim, and the brothers. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man enters through the gates but through me. Through me, says Messiah. Blessed are all those taking refuge in him. Not in buildings, not in liturgies, not in incantations. We don't do magic. In him. A cross-reference comes to mind here. Matthew 7, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Master, Master, this is Messiah speaking, not everyone who says to me, Master, Master, shall enter into the reign of the heavens, but he who is doing the desire of my Father in the heavens. I'm the Lord Yahweh Sabaoth, I change not. Many shall say to me in that day, Master, Master, have we not prophesied in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and done many mighty works in your name? Then I shall declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work lawlessness. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them shall be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, if Messiah is God, and he is, and he does not change, for he does not, and his word will not return to him void, which is true, which words of mine and does them are we supposed to be hearing and doing? Which is exactly what Shema in the word Hebrew means. It's not just to hear, but to hear and do. Shema Yisrael Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is God, and Yahweh is one, Echad. I and my Father are one, Echad. Which doesn't mean one like numerical. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It means one, like unified together, which is what Messiah is saying here in Matthew 7:23. And I shall declare to them, I never knew you intimately. Like a man knows his wife, and the two shall come together and become one flesh to produce fruit. I never knew you. You might have been operating in his name, because his name has authority. And in that name, you prophesied, and you cast out demons, and you did mighty works in his name, in his character, under his brand, if you will. Not because you have any inherent authority, or that I do either. It's his name. It's his reputation that has that authority. Not everyone who says to me, Master, Master, shall enter into the reigns of the heavens, but he who is doing the desire of my Father in the heavens. Well, what is that? Let's go back to Psalms. Blessed is the man who shall not walk in the counsel of the wrong, and shall not stand in the path of the sinners, and shall not sit in the seat of the scoffers, but his delight is in the Torah of Yahweh. And he meditates in his Torah day and night. For he shall be as a tree planted by the rivers of water that yields its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever he does prospers. The wrong are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind blows away. Therefore the wrong shall not rise in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For Yahweh knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wrong comes to naught. Depart from me, you who work lawlessness. I never knew you. That's Psalms 1 and 2, with a 30-plus minute preamble on the Psalms in general. I'll see y'all when I see you.